Hello, this is Professor Kalabata, and these are the writing suggestions for Essay 3. So we're going to run through some of the main ideas that I tried to summarize here on our Module 3 writing suggestions page. And then I will give you a couple of suggestions about things to think about as you're planning the ideas for your essay. So first of all, let's just run through a couple of the big ideas that I summarized from our readings. There's a couple of fundamental questions that these readings are asking. One of them has a lot to do with surveillance. And there's this question, who is watching us? And so I have a diagram here, this triangle. I think that maybe we can sum it up like this. There are these three elements that are watching us all the time. There's the government, which is constantly collecting data on our cell phone usage and our internet activity. There's corporations that are doing the same thing. And there's also each other, which is something that I think some of the readings, they've actually touched on that as well, but not as much as the government and corporations. It's interesting to think about what the motivation is of each of these different parties that are watching us. The government is watching us because they want to maintain safety and security, or at least that's the reason they give us. Edward Snowden also said that when he was working in the National Security Agency, there were a lot of people in the National Security Agency that were just collecting naked photos of people. So there's a whole other discussion about abuse of power to be talked about there. But the official reason the government collects data on us is for the sake of national security. So security and safety. Corporations collect lots of data on us for profit. And then we also watch each other. Now that we have smartphones in our pockets and everybody can take out a smartphone and snap pictures or take video wherever they go, that has also changed the world as well. So we certainly have the ability to take images of each other, and we also have the ability to look at security cameras. There are some places where you can log into the system, and if you have an internet connection, you can see what's happening at the stoplight down the block from your house. So it's interesting to think about, why are we motivated to look at each other? There's a lot of people who are putting their image online because they want people to see them. On YouTube, on TikTok, there's a whole new generation of famous people, people that have become famous because they want to put their faces out there, and they're profiting from it. But then at the same time, do we all want to be able to take images of each other all the time? When we go places, we know that there are people around us who have smartphones, and are we ending up on somebody else's YouTube channel without us knowing it? Anyways, there's a large number of things that we could keep on talking about there, but I think that in general we can put surveillance into these three categories. Who is watching us? The government, corporations, and we're watching each other. And it's a longer, more complicated discussion to have. Why are each of these three parties watching us? So, but another thing, I put a couple of things down here. Why do we care? Individual thought requires privacy. And so we need to be alone with our thoughts so we can grow emotionally, psychologically, and intellectually. And think about journal writing or keeping your diary. If you were writing your personal thoughts in your diary and somebody got a hold of your diary and began reading your diary, or if they took your diary and showed your diary to other people, I think it's safe to say that most people would feel violated by that. And it's interesting to think about why. Why is it that we would feel violated by having some of our innermost thoughts exposed to a person or to the rest of the world? So there certainly is an instinct there that all human beings desire a certain amount of privacy. It's important. And it's interesting to think about why. Privacy is obviously something that is necessary for human beings to be healthy human beings. So it's privacy is something that we need in order to grow as human beings emotionally, psychologically, and intellectually. Uh, Healthy human beings will be able to have a situation where they can move back and forth at will between public space and private space. Uh, in other words, a healthy situation for the typical human being is to be able to put up limits and boundaries, to be able to say, this is when I'm comfortable having everyone see me. And this other type of situation is where I'm comfortable being alone and not having anybody see or hear me at all. This is my private space, and I can leave my private space when I want and enter into public space. And maybe that's the dilemma that we face in modern society now. It's becoming more and more difficult to have that private space, to be able to maintain limits and boundaries with the rest of the world. Being able to maintain limits and boundaries is an important thing to be emotionally healthy. So, what did I say here? Being constantly watched by others inhibits our ability to develop and grow as human beings. So, inhibiting personal growth makes it easier for people to be controlled. So, there's a recurring theme in a lot of these readings that people that are not emotionally, psychologically healthy, people who are living in a situation where their intellectual growth is inhibited by either somebody censoring information so they don't have access to information they need, or somebody is giving them false information. Ignorance and emotional and psychological a lack of emotional and psychological health are factors that make it easier for people in power to control other people. So I got another diagram here. There's multiple ways to control people. We've been talking a lot in the past couple of essays about propaganda and advertising, how that works. And social media, we've also talked about that. We're talking a little bit more about surveillance now. And we're also going a little bit in a little bit more detail into social media. So I did put here surveillance and propaganda. Perhaps these are tactics of control that might be easier to understand. I mean, we've talked about how propaganda and advertising it's basically a form of argument that is not concerned with using support or relevant or logical support, and it is also a form of argument that is not concerned with logical reasoning. So it's a way of misleading people, of giving people a false claim in order to influence them to think or feel or a certain way, or to say or do things. Surveillance, on the other hand, again, up here, surveillance inhibits personal growth. And so ultimately, in order for a person to build their own thoughts, in order for a person to build their own worldview, the way they see the world, and to form opinions about it, they need to have alone time. They need to have privacy. So living under constant surveillance inhibits individualism. It inhibits the ability of the individual to grow and to flourish as an individual human being, to form their own thoughts. So again, we'll come back to that a number of times, but individualism requires privacy. You have to be alone with your own thoughts in order to build your thoughts. And so surveillance is a way of preventing people from having privacy, and ultimately it will inhibit their ability to think as individuals. So propaganda and advertising and surveillance, we can kind of see how these two things work together. The really new thing in society, and it might be difficult for many people to understand, especially if they're very young, but social media is very new. And again, like I said, if you're very young, you might feel like you've grown up with social media, but social media is very, very new, and so society is still figuring it out. I mean, propaganda and advertising and surveillance have been around for a pretty long time, and so there's been a lot of study to understand. In the field of cognitive science, there's been a lot of study to try to understand what do these things do to people. Social media is pretty new, so we're still figuring it out. But so far, I listed just a couple of things here that some of the readings, I tried to synthesize some of the ideas from some of the readings. So, social media, like other businesses today, use artificial intelligence or AI to influence us. So, what is AI? So, you've probably heard people talk about AI. And I'll just say a couple of things about it. This is not a computer science class, but we do have to understand a couple of things about it. There's a couple ways of defining AI. One way is, you see, I put these two points right here. One way of defining AI is something called the singularity, which is a term coined by Vernor Vinge, and he's a computer science professor and a science fiction writer. I believe he's from San Diego, but he was the first one who started using this term, the singularity. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. I'll just say really quick, the term singularity actually comes from astronomy. So if you take an astronomy class, you'll learn what a singularity is, and it has to do it's another term for a black hole, and you can learn what a black hole is in an astronomy class. But I'm not going to go into great detail about what a singularity is. I'm not really sure why Vernor Vinge wanted to use the word singularity to refer to this idea, but okay, whatever. That's a whole other discussion. But very quickly, you might have heard people using this term singularity, and in reference to computer science. Remember, I know it might be a little confusing. Singularity refers to a black hole. So if you study astronomy, you'll run into the term singularity in the field of astronomy. But people a few years back began to use the term singularity to refer to a concept in computer science. And this concept is basically the emergence of AI, of artificial intelligence. And what Vernor Vinge was talking about was, he said, and I believe the year is 2030, about 10 years from now. So Vernor Vinge said that he would be surprised if we didn't have some form if the singularity wouldn't happen by the year 2030. And what did he mean by that? I think what he really meant by that was a computer that is able to think on its own, and a computer that perhaps has consciousness. This might be the closest thing to what we think of as a robot in science fiction, like C3PO or R2D2 in Star Wars. In other words, those characters in Star Wars, those robots, are basically people. They have their own thoughts, they have their own desires, they can think on their own, they can make decisions, they have consciousness. And so Vernor Vinge was thinking, eventually, when human beings can create a computer system that has consciousness, that computer system will basically take off, because it will be able to design improvements in itself. And so if you think about human consciousness, human intelligence, the form of life recognizable as human has been evolving on the planet for about 6 or 7 million years. And so it took our species, our form of life, a couple million years to develop the intelligence that we have right now, to evolve that intelligence. Well, the singularity refers to a computer intelligence, a computer consciousness that would begin to use its own computing power to improve itself. So instead of having to wait for evolution to improve the intelligence of a species, it took our form of life 6 or 7 million years to evolve the brain that we have that gives us a certain amount of intelligence. This artificial intelligence, if it had consciousness, would be able to use its own technology to enhance itself. And so it would suddenly have an exponential growth in intellect that many scientists feel would, I guess, like some of these science fiction stories, it would be a computer intelligence that would suddenly very quickly become smarter than any human being, and no human being would ever be able to shut it off. So at that point, it's kind of like, does this new artificial intelligence kind of become God, and it's become more powerful than us? So as some people still debate whether or not that will be possible. Is it possible for a computer to actually gain intelligence? But whatever. Vernor Vinge believes, and he was the one who started using the term singularity to refer to that. An artificial intelligence with consciousness that would suddenly expand in intelligence faster than we could control. And he thinks it will happen probably by the year 2030. Who knows if he's right? So that's one definition of what AI is. The other definition of AI, the second point right here, it's basically the type of AI that exists right now. So every now and then in the news, you might hear about a world champion chess player who is defeated by a supercomputer. And so what's going on there is that supercomputer does not have consciousness. It's not alive. What it's doing is it is able to run millions of simulations per second. It's basically playing millions of games of chess against itself over and over and over again. And each time it does that, it gathers data on each game. So it accumulates huge amounts of data. And then the computer is able to process through that huge amount of data in order to see patterns. So what I put here, it's basically very large, very fast, very impressive, very complex pattern recognition. And what it's able to do is, therefore, it is able to simulate the appearance of consciousness. So this type of supercomputer, it can actually defeat a human chess player, which makes it seem as though the computer is alive, like a person, like it has consciousness. But it's not. It's basically very, very big, very complex, very impressive pattern recognition. And so this first definition of AI, the singularity, does not exist yet. It's still theoretical, and if it ever exists, it'll be in the future. But this other type of AI, very large, complex pattern recognition, exists right now, and this is what social media uses all the time to basically manipulate us. And so, I put down here, companies use this massive computing power to do these three things. They want us to stay online through what is called endorphin manipulation. So I don't think I had you read about this, and I'll just talk about it really quick. Endorphins are basically a chemical in your brain that make you feel good. Whenever you do something that is pleasurable, you get an endorphin rush. You're something that feels physically good, something that feels emotionally good, laughing with your friends, or going on a long distance run, and sometimes athletes call it the runner's high. After you exercise, you get that euphoric feeling that you're really relaxed and you feel good and your head feels clear. So endorphins are basically it's a chemical in your brain that makes you feel good. And what this means, endorphin manipulation, is that these websites will give you something that they know is going to feel good. And so they have, for instance, psychologists working for these corporations. They've noticed that when you get attention, when somebody is paying attention to you, it feels good. It feels good to be listened to. It feels good to be to have somebody acknowledging you. And so this might be, not might be, this is one of the reasons why they have all these things on social media, like, hey, somebody tagged you in their photograph. Hey, so-and-so is typing right now. They're going to respond to you. So whenever you get some sort of recognition, you get a small little dose, a small dose of endorphins in your brain. And they've actually done studies on this, that it can be addictive. So each time somebody is clicking on something on social media or on a website, and there's some sort of recognition coming back to them, they get a small little dose of endorphins because it feels the same way. In fact, the same thing happens when you're talking to somebody and the person you're talking to is looking right at you and smiling. They've done studies on that as well. So when somebody's paying attention to you and you're getting positive emotional feedback from somebody, it feels good. It feels good to have somebody paying attention to you and giving you positive emotions. And so your brain gets a small dose of endorphins whenever you're in a positive social interaction like that with another person. And so social media knows how to give you that endorphin rush by giving you likes or tweets or whatever online. So they're manipulating endorphin surges in your brain to get you to feel like you need to keep coming back. And it has been studied. This is addictive. It can be addictive. So they want you to keep coming back online through endorphin manipulation, and they also get you to connect with other people online. So they want you to connect with other people and make you want to socially interact with other people online as opposed to face to face. You could connect with other people by actually talking to them face to face, but they want you to feel that you want to go online in order to feel connected to other people. We'll talk more about that in a second. And then, of course, the other thing is, ultimately it is about selling products. So they know if they do these two things up here, that if you're, whoops, get rid of that. Okay, if you're online, the more you're online, the more you're likely to buy stuff while you're there. So just a quick paragraph right here. The general rule of thumb is that if you're using something and it's free, like Facebook, if you're not paying any money to get access to it, then you are the product. And what does that mean? So the company is making money off of you by data mining. Your behavior is the data. The more data they have from you, the more tools they have to get you to do the three things listed above, right? These three things. So they want you using their product as much as possible. When you are not online looking at their website, they are losing money. So the more you click, remember, there's the supercomputer that is doing large, complex pattern recognition. Every time you click on something, even if you're not clicking on something, when you're just sitting there looking at the website and things are stationary and you're not clicking on anything, even that is data. They're collecting data on how long you spend looking at something, or they know they can prod you, again, through endorphin manipulation. If the computer recognizes that maybe you're sitting there and not doing anything, it will do things to try to get your attention again. Something will pop up on the screen, like an advertisement. So they're constantly collecting data on your activity online in order to generate a profile for you. And then the computer is analyzing that data and giving you endorphin manipulation in response to that data. All right, so the general idea is that if you are paying attention to their website, if you're spending time on their website, that is money for them. They are collecting your data, the data that shows what your behavior is, and they are exposing you to advertisements and trying to get you to buy stuff. So that kind of piggybacks on another question here. So what makes people feel fulfilled and happy? And the two big things are probably personal growth and emotionally fulfilling relationships with others. You notice there's these arrows, there's a cyclical relationship here. So personal growth, becoming a more intellectually, emotionally, psychologically sophisticated and more developed human being, makes you more mature, and it gives you more wisdom. It gives you, and this probably results in more emotionally fulfilling relationships with others. And at the same time, having emotionally fulfilling relationships with others results in more personal growth. So that's why you see that there's a cyclical relationship between these things. So I put a note here. Notice that you don't need to buy anything or use any product to get these things. So, life experiences, just making choices, making a desire to be different, to develop more as a human being, and making a decision to try to interact with other people around you in order to create more fulfilling relationships. You don't have to spend any money in order to do that. And so, uh, in fact, the use of consumer products and social media can actually inhibit your ability to have personal growth and emotionally fulfilling relationships. And I guess it doesn't take a lot of explaining to understand why. If you're sitting in front of a computer screen, you're not hanging out with your friends, forming emotionally fulfilling relationships. But the tricky thing about social media is, you notice going back up here, they want you to feel like interacting with people online is giving you this, when in fact it's not. So, um, and so that's why, and also remember that as long as you are doing these things, going through personal growth and having emotionally fulfilling relationships with other people, as long as you're doing these things for real in the real world, you are not online, and therefore they are not making money off of you. So, they want you in front of that screen on your smartphone or on your computer or, whatever type of screen it is. They want you to spend your life on that screen, which probably is going to inhibit your ability to do this. So, there are some negative effects here, which some of the readings have talked about. Addiction. So we kind of talked about that. Remember, the endorphin manipulation. So feeling like you're getting attention, right? There's that emotionally euphoric feeling you get from hanging out with other people or forming a very close emotional bond with another person, having somebody pay attention to you and smile with you and laugh with you. You get endorphins when you have those emotionally fulfilling experiences. So they want to try to give you those endorphin rush, but without a real person. They want you to have that endorphin rush by sitting in front of a computer. And that endorphin rush can become addictive. So they want you to feel like you need to click on something again and again and again in order to give you that endorphin rush. But of course, the ultimate result of that can be loneliness. So a lack of emotionally fulfilling relationships makes a person feel lonely, which maybe makes them feel like they want to go back to try to do more of this in order to give themselves a feeling of emotional fulfillment. And so you see that there's a negative cyclical feedback loop there. Somebody feels lonely, so they keep going back to try to click on more stuff online to make them feel connected with people. But the more they do that, the more they are not connected to people. But each time they do it, they get an endorphin rush. But the endorphin rush does not actually result in emotional fulfillment. So, loneliness and addiction are two things. I could have made another diagram here, another cyclical diagram where addiction and loneliness kind of play on each other. But because here's actually these three things connect: relationships that are not actually emotionally gratifying, right? So when you're connecting with somebody online, it's not going to be as emotionally gratifying as actually sitting face to face with a real person. So these things can also result in a warped sense of self. Some of our readings have touched on that. And there's also the warped worldview, showing you stuff that is similar to stuff you've already looked at, creates misinformation and polarization. So remember, they want to collect data on your behavior so that they can show you more stuff that they think you're going to be interested in so that you stay there longer. And sometimes it's consumer products, sometimes it's articles or things to read. And so you can see how you read something and the computer is going to try to show you something that is going to be similar to the thing you just read, hoping that you're going to stay there and continue reading. This is one of the big things that people are talking about right now with all the political conflict in American society. They often use the term polarization, meaning like the North and South Pole, like people gravitating to extreme places far apart from each other and not being able to interact with each other. So um, uh, when you're in a situation where you look at something and then the computer system is showing you something that is similar to what you just looked at, that experience is going to inhibit critical thinking because it inhibits the ability to assess the accuracy of information if people are constantly shown stuff that they just looked at, which is probably something they already agree with. And so, because they're shown lots of articles or lots of readings that seem similar to what they've already decided they want to believe to begin with, it seems like it's giving them an affirmation of what they already think is true, rather than starting off with the idea that maybe I don't know what the truth is, and I'm going to try to read stuff to try to figure out what the truth is. So going and searching for stuff, looking for the truth, is more likely to give you critical thinking and a more accurate perception of what the world is actually like, rather than reading something and having a computer give you something else that is similar to what you just read. So um, people have studied this and they can see that eventually what the computer system will do is it will want to give the person more and more extreme information to get them to stay longer. Because remember, they want you to feel that endorphin rush. They want you to get emotionally involved in what you're seeing on the computer screen. So they're going to show more and more extreme material that is similar to what you just looked at. And so this is why people, the more they click on stuff, the more the material seems to become more and more extreme. And this can give a person a warped worldview. So uh, eventually they're looking at information that is not accurate. And something they know about cognitive science is that if something is a lie, if something is not accurate, but it is repeated over and over again without any voice that is countering the lie, then eventually the lie begins to seem like it's a truth. So if you want people to believe a lie, you need to repeat it over and over and over again, and you need to make sure that they don't see anything different. So, and that's what a lot of this these AI systems are doing. They're showing people something that is similar to what they just looked at, but a bit more extreme each time they click on something in order to get them more and more emotionally involved in what they're looking at on the screen. And it's also making sure that there's nothing else that is really different from the previous thing you just looked at. So the ideas become more and more extreme, and the person is not getting exposed to anything that is different than what they just looked at. Um, uh, so this is also one of the reasons why I wanted you to do research on each of your essay assignments, right? Being able to assess information for accuracy. Where can you find accurate information? That is an extremely important skill to have because we're surrounded by so much information that is not accurate. So the last thing right here, bullying. I actually talked a little bit about this in our syllabus, although I didn't mention the word bullying. You notice in the syllabus, I said when we post things on our discussion boards, please make sure that you do not use all capital letters. Just say what you want to say. Don't try to crack jokes because in an online format, information can be misunderstood very easily. Because when we interact with people face to face, we're not just communicating with our words, we're communicating with our facial expressions and our body language. And so in an online environment, it is easy to misunderstand what somebody intended to say. Now, how does that connect to bullying? Well, again, if somebody says something to another person face to face, the communication is not just verbal, it is visual. Body language, facial expressions, also tone of voice. So there are all these different ways of communicating information. And and also when we are communicating online, we only have one level of communication. We're just seeing the words. We're not hearing the tone of voice. We're not seeing facial expressions. And also, if we say something that is either maybe it's unintentionally mean, or maybe somebody is saying something intentionally mean, they don't have to face the consequences, the immediate consequences for saying something that would be harmful to the other person. If you're going to do something that is harmful to another person, it's difficult to do it face to face because that person is going to respond right there and then to what you just said. So, um, that doesn't mean that people don't do mean things to each other face to face. There's always bullies on the playground. But in an online environment, it is easier to be mean to somebody, either intentionally or here this is intentional, right? Bullying online with intent to cause harm to somebody. It can become very hurtful because the person that is doing the bullying, their message, their words become more and more extreme because they don't have to face any consequences for saying something to somebody's face. And But at the same time, the person who's receiving that message is being emotionally harmed by it, combined with the fact that it's usually done in a public space where there's lots of other people that are seeing it as well. So, um, so bullying is one more factor that we haven't talked as much about, but it's something that is a negative outcome of social media. Now, okay, so we've been talking a lot about the negative things having to do with social media, surveillance, advertising, social media. There's a lot of negative stuff there. Now, there is, I had you guys write some ideas about possible positive things with social media on our discussion board. And maybe, we can spend a minute or two talking about it here at the end. So first of all, social media does result in what some people call the democratization of ideas. So in years past, there were usually a small number of very prominent people, usually people that had a lot of wealth and power, who were able to dominate the discussion. And everybody else was basically at home watching TV, watching politicians or movie stars or journalists or whoever the people were, but there was a relatively small number of people in society who controlled the entire cultural discussion. Well, not anymore. Now, all you need is a computer and an internet connection, and you can post something on YouTube, you can put it on TikTok, on wherever. And so anybody who's got an idea, they can put it out there and they can become part of the national or even global conversation on the subject matter. And that can be very empowering. Of course, obviously, business opportunities. It's a great place for people to start small businesses. You don't have to go rent a place in the mall. You don't have to, you can, if you've got a great idea, there are lots of business opportunities available on the internet. And of course, that leads to other possibilities like political activism. So there are pros and cons to political activism. I had you read some of that as well. But it's very easy to organize people and to organize them quickly. There are some downsides to that. You saw in the reading assignment that the fact that they can organize people very quickly means that sometimes people are not as devoted to it. So, but there are pros and cons to that. But with social media, with online activity now, anybody can become politically active, and large numbers of people can get very organized very quickly. So you can have a protest in the streets tomorrow, and that can be very empowering. And we've been talking a lot about the negative impact of interacting with people online, how it's not emotionally gratifying and how it can lead to endorphin manipulation. But at the same time, if you have relatives that live far away, social media gives you a way to maintain a connection with them. And of course, there's also a lot of convenience. I mean, business opportunities, buying and selling things, purchasing something online. Um, it might be kind of scary to have all of your medical records online, but at the same time, it's also extremely convenient to be able to log in and get your prescription filled. And the other one, remember, we were talking about, I guess, these two, convenience and safety and security. So, again, who is watching us? Um, the government, each other, and corporations. So, the corporations and government are collecting huge amounts of data on our activity, and they're doing it because corporations want to make profit and the government wants to maintain safety and security. And there's a lot of downsides to that. A lot of people think it's very scary, but at the same time, corporations collecting lots of data about us has a lot of convenience. Being able to purchase things from corporations online, it's very convenient. And sometimes it's nice getting suggestions from corporations. I mean, we can talk a lot about the negatives, but the truth is, a lot of people really like that. And at the same time, uh, privacy concerns with the government collecting data. I mean, a lot of people say that's very scary, and it is. I think most people are going to say that there need to be some checks and balances on what the government can and cannot do. And we don't really have any laws yet that are strong enough to really do what most people feel the government should and should not be able to do. But still, if you talk about safety and security, a lot of people are going to say, I don't want anybody to be able to commit some horrible act. And if the government is collecting data on people's activities so that they can prevent the next, shooter or something like that, a lot of people are willing to live with that. In fact, maybe one last thing I'll say before we finish the last couple of ideas here. About 100 years ago, in the early 20th century, many people were starting to get electricity in their house. People didn't have electricity in their houses yet, and they were just starting to put electricity lines connecting to all the houses. And a lot of people were very uncomfortable with it because they said, the electric company is pumping something into my house, and the people in the company that provides the electricity, they have a record of that. So they know when my lights are on and when my lights are off. They know how much electricity I'm using, and they know when I'm using it, which means that somebody in the company that provides the electricity can basically figure out what I'm doing all day long by looking at my electricity bill. And at the same time, it seems very dangerous. Boy, electricity can start fires and it can burn down my house. So this was a controversial thing 100 years ago. And the interesting thing to note is that you notice all of those concerns are true. They're accurate. Somebody at the electricity company really can look at your electricity bill, and they know when you're awake and when you're asleep, for instance. They know when your lights are turned on and when they're turned off. They know what time of day you're using more electricity and what time of day you're using less electricity, which means they can figure out what you're doing and what your habits are during the day. So when people 100 years ago were concerned about that privacy, they were right. People can use that information to figure out what you're doing during the day. And also, they were afraid of the dangers, and that's also accurate. Electricity really can burn down your house, and it does happen. There are fires caused by electricity every year, and people do die in fires. Now, over time, people just became less concerned with those things, even though people still die from fires and people can still look at your electricity bill and they can figure out things about your personal behavior. But over time, people just felt that the convenience of having electricity in their house was more important to them than the privacy concerns and the fire concerns. And so today, everybody has electricity in their house and nobody really thinks about it or isn't really concerned about it. So it's interesting to think about in the years to come, in the future, how much are we going to be concerned about all of this? People are really concerned about what social media is doing to us, what surveillance is doing to us. And how much of the stuff going on right now is going to be something that people are going to feel like we really need to get a hold of this and we need to stop it or limit it or put some sort of checks and balances on it? And how much of this stuff is going to be something that over time people just aren't really going to be concerned about at all? 10, 20, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, are people going to say, yeah, it was interesting that people were freaking out about social media back in the early 21st century, but that seems like just a silly thing to talk about now, or not? Is it something that people really are going to look back on and say, boy, it was crazy how people allowed social media to screw up their lives back in the early 21st century. Thank God we got that under control. So, who knows? We don't know yet. How much of this stuff is going to be just people over time will say, I like the convenience and I like the safety and security. And how much of this stuff is going to be, these negative things are going to outweigh the positive things, and people are going to say, this is crazy and harmful and we got to do something about it. And it's probably too soon to tell. We can't really tell yet. So anyways, that's a quick summary of the ideas that I think are some of the important ideas to talk about in the essay. I'll talk about a couple of structural things to watch out for. So first of all, let's just look at the assignment sheet. So the question is, analyze your digital record. What lessons or conclusions can you derive by analyzing your own digital record? So some of the things that I've said before is you want to be able to say the prompt out loud and then say your thesis statement out loud, and your thesis should sound like a direct response to the essay prompt. Now, this one is a little bit more open-ended. It's a little bit more, some people might say a little bit more vague. It doesn't say, tell us if you think it's good or bad. Sometimes an essay prompt gives you specific options. You have to choose this or that. And this one isn't doing that. It's requiring you to think a little bit more. You have to try to come to a conclusion, give us some larger lesson, which means that what you're going to want to do, I said, try to keep a digital diary for a couple of days. Remember I said I'm not going to collect that from you, but try to make some notes. How many things do you do for a couple of days that leave a record? The camera at the stoplight saw you and has a record of you being there. How many times do you use a credit card to buy something? How many of your medical records are online? You went to the doctor, they know you were there. And, for a couple of days, just write down all this stuff. You want to get a list of things that you do. Even if you don't do a lot of things online, there are records of what you are doing every day. I mean, if it's, video cameras, when you walk into a store and you buy something, even if you pay with cash, the video camera saw you there and they saw what you're buying. So even if you don't go on Facebook a lot, you are doing things that are leaving a record. People have digital records about what you are doing every day. And so you need to try to be more aware of that. So that's why I wanted you to do this digital diary. Try to be more aware of what you're doing. So over a couple of days, you'll probably get a list of stuff. And then what you want to do is you want to look at this list and try to form some opinions. Try to sum up. Do you see a pattern? Is there a pattern here about your behavior? Are there patterns that other people could see? Or maybe it's simply, how do you feel about it? Do you feel good about it? Do you like it? Does it make you feel happy? Does it make you feel safe? Does it make you feel scared? Does it make you feel angry? Is there a pattern? Is there a lesson? Or how do you feel about it? Try to sum up a main idea that seems to emerge out of this list of observations that you make. Okay, so spend some time with that and try to get a main idea. And then so you got to spend, I think you have to spend a little bit more time on your thesis statement in this essay than you did in the previous essays. Now, I will say that. In my opinion, I think you need to spend some time, get some scratch paper and spend some time on your thesis statement. Structure in the body of the essay. I said, try to make sure you have a nice flow of thought. You want each section of your essay to feel like it's one piece of a larger whole. So you don't want the essay to feel like a bunch of mini essays stuck together. Let me look at something else really quick. So remember on our intro page, our home page, we got the intro material. There was the review stuff. This is kind of the stuff that I teach people in English 1A. So the typical college essay, you got your intro paragraph up here that starts with a broad idea and works down to a specific point, your thesis statement. And then in the body of the idea, you have a list of ideas. In the body of your essay, you have a list of ideas. So with this essay, I think the possible danger is that you'll just have a list, like a thesis statement, something like I like my online activity makes me feel good, right? Maybe something that's a little vague. Try to be specific, but maybe kind of a vague thesis statement, and then the first thing I do is I'm on Facebook, right? And then the next paragraph. The second thing I do is I buy things online. The third thing I do is I go to the store and there's the video cameras. So I think the danger with this essay is that the body of the essay might be just sort of a list of things that you do. The first thing I do is this, the second thing I do is this, and it doesn't have a really strong main idea pulling everything together to form a single argument. You want each of these pieces in the body of your essay to be a piece of a larger idea. So you want each of these things connecting to the specific point, the main idea that you gave us in the intro. And so otherwise, if you don't have a really strong thesis statement, then it will feel more like it's a couple of mini essays, a couple of small essays stuck together in the body of the essay, rather than feeling like one essay with a bunch of pieces in it. Okay, so you want the pieces to work together. They need to connect to your main idea, and they need to have a flow of thought. How does each one set up to or connect to the other things around it? Okay, so I think with this, whenever you get an essay prompt that doesn't really give you a specific thing, okay, well, you have to say if it's good or bad, or you have to do this or that. It's something like analyze. What conclusion or what lesson do you see? An essay prompt like that requires you to do a little bit more thinking. You got to put a little bit more time on the scratch paper to get a strong thesis, a strong main idea that's going to pull all that stuff together. Okay, so spend a couple of days, make a list of things that you can talk about, and then look at those things and try to see what sort of larger idea connects all of them. What lesson is emerging out of those observations, and then try to have a strong thesis statement and then order the ideas in the body of the essay in a logical flow and make it clear in each section how it connects back to that main idea. Okay, so I would say that this particular essay assignment, because it says analyze and find some larger lesson or a conclusion, it's a little bit more vague. And so it's the type of essay prompt that requires a little bit more energy to create a stronger thesis and a stronger structure in the body of the essay. So I do think you have to spend a bit more time on that. Okay, so let's see. I think that's everything we want to talk about. And good luck on the essay assignment.